It's time to come get some in Duke 3D with Hollywood Holocaust. Duke 3D's biggest advantage, especially over something like Doom, is replicating real city environments, so starting out with a street-side movie theater was a good choice. Notably, it shows off reflective mirrors in the bathroom, giving you a heads up of the aliens ahead, in addition to letting Duke admire himself in the mirror, of course. It also shows off how dynamic it can be, with earthquakes and parts of the environment scriptedly breaking apart. There's plenty of room for secrets too, giving you a taste of the unique at the time pipe bombs, in addition to rocket launcher and Ripper, basically Duke 3D's chain gun. You can even play around with a jetpack in the very vertically inclined street area if you can find it. While perhaps not nearly as iconic as Doom's hangar, it does a good job showcasing what Duke 3D has to offer. It's time to keep our head down as we enter E1M2 Red Light District. A comparison might actually be a little unfair, since it's obviously not going to wow you as much as the first level did. That being said though, it still introduces a few concepts of its own, for starters combination switch locks. It also ups the ante with environmental destruction by having you flat out demolish a building. It also introduces the concept of enemy patrols in the form of a recon patrol vehicle. I also find it interesting how it's only the second level and has a fake-out exit. You definitely wouldn't expect them to take a swerve so early on, so it works well. It even shows just how interactive Duke 3D can be with a full-on playable pool table. Ultimately, it's still a very good level with some surprises and new additions, but it's just not as grandiose as Hollywood Holocaust, so it's going right below that. Prepare to fight for your life in E1M3 Death Row. Right away, the level has no chill because you're unarmed and frying from the start and a pig cop to contend with if you didn't opt for the easiest difficulty. At least it gives you 3 big medkits right away and you are gonna need them. As well as the pistol and shotgun nearby. It also takes a cheeky poke at Doom in the form of one doomed space marine. It's kind of funny then that it's guarded by a newly introduced Octobrain, which feels like its behavior is just a little inspired by Doom's Cacodemon. Probably the biggest addition is introducing swimming at the end, although destructible cracked walls and laser trip bombs are interesting too. All around, it's still good, but it's just not as interesting of a level as the previous two, so I'm placing it below Red Light District. Better grab your radiation suit because it's time for E1M4 Toxic Dump. Even though Death Row introduced a bit of swimming, Toxic Dump definitely greatly expanded on the concept, starting out with a sinking submarine. The funny thing is, in a vertical way, the emergency hatch has the same switch code as the adult shop in the second level. The cliff area with the blue keycard awaiting you can be pretty tough, but thankfully it's all projectile shots. For now at least, only pig cops share your hit scan wizardry. Not only does the level make great use of swimming, it introduces the idea of being shrunk, both enemies and yourself. There's even a nifty turbine puzzle where you have to go between the missing blades to avoid being crushed. Though it's still not as iconic as the first two, the use of swimming and other mechanics rises it above Death Row at least. Grab your space helmet because it's time for E1M7 Launch Facility. Perhaps a more accurate level name is Sewer with a Launch Facility tacked on at the end because most of the level is fairly bland. When you finally do get into the shuttle, that's when things start getting interesting. You prime it, press a switch outside, the place starts shaking and the shuttle proceeds to come crashing down. If you know about the limitations of the build engine, this perhaps isn't too surprising. While a later level does do a missile launch with some trickery, I can see why they opted for this. At least there's a jetpack, so something can successfully fly off here. As a whole, the shuttle launch is a nicely dynamic finale, but there really isn't that much to the rest of the level. I'm putting it below Toxic Dump. It's time to sink into E1M5 The Abyss. Kind of similarly to Launch Facility, the level starts out a bit on the bland side at first. Large cliff sides along with nuclear waste falls just don't make for the most interesting aesthetics. It does start to build up though with the introduction of a red-hot lava area. More and more, the canyons show alien architecture poking through until you're in what looks like a ship. It's here that you confront the end boss of the first episode, the Battle Lord. Basically, its moveset alternates between a Spider Mastermind-esque minigun flinging sticky bombs that stay where they hit the ground and just trying to step on you. If you don't like the rapid-fire hit scan, you're definitely not going to like it when they return as mini-bosses. Overall, the level's still not the most interesting, and I'm not a fan of this type of boss, but the build-up was nice, so it's going above Launch Facility. It's time to blast off an E2M1 Spaceport. Honestly, after much of the later levels of Episode 1, it's a nice step up in terms of aesthetic and level design. One nice touch is there's a spaceship circling around the port and firing missiles at it. This level also introduces the minigun wielding enforcers, a new hit scan threat to deal with. Thankfully, there's also a drinkable water fountain for infinite healing, which is a nice compromise. My favorite part of the level, though, is that it introduces arguably the most powerful weapon in the game, the Shrink Ray. While some, like the Devastator, may have more damage potential overall, it can one-shot the largest number of enemies, assuming you follow up on it before they grow back. Some nice vertical jetpack sections round things out, including a nice sky view. The level ultimately isn't too grandiose, but it's very tightly designed and has some really nice elements, so I'm placing it above Toxic Dump. Grab your light bulbs and small glass tanks as we head to E2M2 Incubator. This is certainly a level of surprises, both pleasant and of the enemy variety, starting out with an escape pod launching you to your next destination. You quickly learn, however, that this level is full of the self-destructing sentry drones that the last level introduced one of at the exit. One nice thing, though, is that the level actually gives you every single weapon if you get secrets. This includes introducing the ice-cold freeze thrower, the rapid-fire explosive devastator, and your own version of the laser trip bombs. The level design, while perhaps not nearly as tight as the previous levels, has some bigger areas and more complexity. Overall, I'd consider it more ambitious and a step up, so it's going above Spaceport. Get ready to explore the final frontier in E2M3 Warp Factor. If you're pistol starting, this is going to be a tough one due to abundance of sentry drones and introducing the Battlelord mini-boss. It's far from impossible though, especially since sentry drones have a trick to blow them up on the other side of a door without taking damage. Getting around the difficulty curve, there's a nice level to be had here. It has a nice blend of small and large areas and expands on Incubator's escape pod by having a controllable one. And I'm not gonna lie, having an homage to the Star Trek bridge earned it a lot of points with me. The outside view is also gorgeous, especially the window view that you can open. Despite the pretty sharp difficulty curve on a come get some pistol start, I can't deny the beautiful level design and a stellar Star Trek reference. I'll place it above Incubator, there's an upward trend so far. Right now it's time for E2M4 Fusion Station. Right away you'll notice it goes for a very organic look, like the finale of The Abyss. Of course, it doesn't have the relatively dull cliff sides beforehand, instead having unique alien architecture that looks far more pleasing to the eye. One thing I really appreciate is some intricate mechanics, like a door that lowers and rotates in front of one that has both up and down, and a middle section that goes left and right all from the center. A nice spinning turbine section with some underwater switches helps to add some variety. It all climaxes with the destruction of an energy core. And might I say, a catwalk view of space with metal hands gripping bars just plain looks cool. If I'm being perfectly honest, I really like the aesthetic and touches the level offers, not to mention having a very vertically huge main area, going above warp factor. It's time to chart a course in the E2M5 occupied territory. For most of the level, I kinda like it. It's not really pulling out any new tricks at this point like the previous ones, but it has some nice touches like aliens closing the door on you at the beginning. Where I feel the level really drops the gun though is when it starts throwing Battlelord mini-bosses on you. Since I come get some pistol start each level, I basically ran past the first three, that's right, three that were all guarding one keycard in a single room. Two also guard the exit, making a grand total of 5 of them. Each one is basically a spider mastermind with the addition of landmines. I don't want to judge a level on difficulty, but rapid fire plus hit scan plus bullet sponge just isn't very engaging. It feels like RNG if you'll avoid taking a ton of damage the second you go around a corner unless you inch forward to his left. Overall, the level design is still fine, but it's not as creative and relies too much on spamming a hit scan mini-boss, so I'm placing it below warp factor. You spin me right round, baby, right round, like E2M10 spin cycle, baby, right spun round, round. Probably the nicest thing I can say about it is it's like a much more enjoyable version of Doom's Fortress of Mystery, not that that's saying a whole lot. The premise literally revolves around a spinning disc with hordes of enemies, though the level's at least nice enough to provide a lot of armaments for us pistol-starting chumps. Admittedly, it's funny how the sentry drones are affected despite flying, so they just end up getting spun around. The commandos are the obvious threat since they lob rockets that aren't affected. While there are 2 Battlelord mini-bosses at the end, you get a shrink ray, so I made short work of them if you'll pardon the pun. I feel like this map would be an absolute blast in multiplayer, though I'm ranking these as single-player maps. Ultimately, it's a fun little diversion even if the map design is very shallow. I'll place it above occupied territory. Let's brush up on our Roman history in E2M6 Tiberias Station. After occupied territory, this is a breath of fresh air, only having 1 Battlelord mini-boss. The level's also nice enough to give you a shrink ray, which if you're using Duke 32 to turn off auto aim, you can one-hit kill by shooting his leg. Beyond that, the level has some really nice design choices, like a couple of mirrors and nice big hallways to see around the corners. Another nice thing to see again is a water fountain for reliable healing. I guess one wouldn't really make sense in alien levels, but maybe a water spurt somewhere or something. Also, you can find a ton of goodies in the vents, as well as a lot of protozoid slammers, so you better go in kicking. Overall, I think it has the best balance of difficulty in open to closed areas in episode 2 so far. I'm placing it above Incubator. Let's grab some cheese batteries in E2M7 Lunar Reactor. Speaking of the dark side, one thing I really like is this level actually has a couple of Star Wars references. One is a reference to the garbage chute compactor, and the other is Luke stuck in the Wampa Cave, which Duke 64, funny enough, replaces with Yoda. Another cool thing is there's actual space behind a bathroom mirror. Normally it isn't accessible because it's null space to make a dummy sector, so it's a handy multi-purpose. Now, one thing I wasn't as much of a fan of was 3 Battlelord mini-bosses, 2 of them together even. At least that's nowhere near as egregious as Occupied Territory, especially since the level gives you so much more for weapons and ammo. Overall, it's solid enough, and I'm a sucker for Star Wars references, so I'm placing it just below Tiberius Station. Grab your flashlight because it's time for E2M8 Dark Side. I'll be honest with you, this ranking is going to be biased because this level is an absolute classic if you ask me. If there's one flaw, it's that maybe the subway trains can be shortened a bit. This may be the one time the Saturn version has an edge for level design because it just has teleporters. Other than that, it has a lot going for it, with Alpha Transport being my personal favorite. This level even has the only 2 pig cops that can be found in the second episode. They're dead, of course, because they're mutated humans, and you can find one on an operating table. Then you've got an actual trek on the moon's surface, a nice big area with sentry drones pouring out at you. And as if all that still wasn't enough for you, it ends with teleporting through a monolith into an alien base. Aside from a little repetition here and there, there's very little to complain about. It's an enjoyable enough level throughout. I'm actually placing this one above Red Light District. It's time to go on the edge with E2M11 Lunatic Fringe. The gimmick of this level is non-Euclidean geometry, made possible by how the build engine functions. Basically, this level's main ring is 72 degrees all around, best seen through the windows in the center where different ones show different things in the same space. The level itself is basically just shoot all the switches around to open the center, dealing with some enemies in the meantime. And of course, the center has 4 Battlelord mini-bosses waiting for you. Honestly, I don't see why so many of these levels have to rely on spamming this guy on you. Even Final Doom was far more scarce about its boss enemies, minus of course the 2 secret levels on Plutonia. It just seems like a bit much, relying on cheap rapid-fire hit-scan bullet sponge. More variety of enemies would be nice. It has some really interesting ideas, I just wish it didn't rely on Battlelord spam, going right below Fusion Station. It's time to pay respects in E2M9 Overlord. I find it kind of funny how after several levels relying on spamming you with Battlelords, the Overlord is far more engaging to fight. Much like the Cyberdemon to Doom Spider Mastermind, he fires rockets rather than bullets, making it more a matter of just dodging rather than poking corners. The cutscene after winning is also hilarious, with Duke certainly staying true to his word and taking a load off. The rest of the level is also pretty engaging, notably a nursery-looking area with a stream of water and protozoid eggs all over the place. The level is also nice enough to provide shortcuts into places like force fields and doors locked on the other side. As a fan of Metroidvania, I can appreciate that since it encourages you to explore around. Episode 2 has been quite a mixed bag, but at least it finishes strong. I'm placing Overlord just above Tiberius Station. Let's tenderize some E3M1 raw meat. With one exception, this episode is all city levels, which I greatly appreciate since Duke 3D just fits so naturally with those. This level in particular is modeled after a sushi karaoke bar, complete with various body parts on plates heading through a water conveyor. Another thing of interest is, like Incubator, you can find every weapon in it. I guess Duke's going for the sampler platter. The level also makes pretty good use of underwater environments, starting with a kitchen sink and leading into a display pond. Since it takes place back on good old planet Earth, that also means pig cops are back, and after the Battlelord spam, it's really made me appreciate how predictable and slow firing they are. All in all, it's nice to see Duke in a city environment again where he truly shines, and Raw Meat is a good episode introducer. It's going above Overlord. Let's go grab some Benjamins and E2M2 bankroll. These levels seem to be getting more pistol start friendly. This one gives you everything. Probably the most noteworthy thing about bankroll is a couple of puzzles you have to go through. You've got one where you have to get all 3 doors to be opened at once, and the other is just past that where you have to get some giant gears spinning to get through. One funny thing though is that there are 2 battle lords, but they're placed around explosives, so if you shoot them fast enough, they're just dead on the spot. Even if they manage to live, the level also gives you a shrink ray, so it's not too hard to bring them down. Overall, it's another fairly good map, just not as memorable as Raw Meat, so I'm placing it just above Lunar Reactor. Get your water wings because it's time for E3M3 Flood Zone. While no Duke 3D level is perfect, I'd argue that this comes close to it. The premise itself is just a lot of fun, a half-flooded city with Duke 3D swim mechanic that's basically the jetpack with a few bells and whistles. Being in different sectors also means there's more 3D depth than if it was purely on land, like going up and down the central building from roof to ground floor. It also adds some nice visual variety, like one building overcome with tentacles and the endgame leading into a broken water pipe. This level is also a give all weapons level and is especially generous with the Devastator ammo. Even before I started making this list, I knew where I'd place this level. It's the most iconic map for me and it's going to the top, eclipsing Hollywood Holocaust. It's time to get shaking in LA Rumble. This might just be one of Duke 3D's snarkier levels because it throws shade at id Software. There's not really anything mean-spirited, mind you, just id's office and an earthquake with Duke remarking, "I ain't afraid of no quake." Obviously a reference to at the time the upcoming polygonal quake, which funny enough is the game whose levels I'll be ranking after Duke 3D. There's also a reference to, a certain type of healthcare clinic. Other than that, the main part of the level is that it has a lot of vertical ascension. If you don't have a jetpack, you'll need to hitch an elevator ride to reach the actual offices above. Good amount of pig cops too, but like I said, pig cops are relatively predictable and slow to fire, so it's all good there. Overall, it's a pretty good level with some nice verticality. I'm placing it just below Darkside. It's time for a light camera action in E3M5 movie set. As Duke funnily points out, this makes 2 rides of his that the alien shot down, since the helicopter from the last level is seen crashing. I have to give Richard Levelord Gray credit, all 5 of these levels are pistol start friendly, which he made. This is another one that offers all weapons. I may have given the impression that I hate Battle Lords, but I really don't, and this shows that when there's just one, and especially you have the ammo to deal with it, I'm perfectly fine with that. I also find it kind of funny that the movie in production is based on Lunar Apocalypse, literally the last episode. They must really be booking it with these movies, or maybe a good amount of time passed between then, which Duke was in space, so maybe it did. Either way, it's a pretty nice level revolving around a movie studio. I'll place it just below Raw Meat. Prepare for a big fall in E3M10 Teardrops. The best way to describe it is it's like Duke 3D's Fortress of Mystery in that the design is very simplistic and it relies on just enemies. Granted, it does have somewhat more going for it than that did, with 4 areas occupying the same space. It's easily the least complex level so far though, and it's not like it's introducing a new boss or anything like that. The 4 areas are lunar, alien lava, a cliffside, and a tentacle-infested brick and wooden building area. So basically it's just themes you've seen before in small square form with enemies of different types in them. Non-Euclidean space is cool and all, but that's more a compliment of the build engine itself, honestly. It's going below death row, there just isn't enough here to make it any better than the bottom of the barrel. Grab your train ticket as we cross the turnstile in E3M6 Rapid Transit. This is certainly the level of moving sectors, from the beginning revolving doors to a spinning magazine rack. Naturally, this climaxes with subway trains that move around a track. While Fusion Station had a controllable escape pod and Darkside did have train cars, the subway trains are in constant motion when they aren't stopping at select stations. I could have done without the back-to-back Battle Lords, but I feel like I'm a broken record at this point. Probably the most visually interesting part is this alien base secret that's a little weird to say the least. A library kind of inner area leading to the exit is also a nice change of scenery. It is a pretty good level with a nice subway train gimmick overall. It's going above Lunatic Fringe. Get ready to adjust your thermostats for E3M7 Fahrenheit. I'm not sure if it got its name from the fire station or the metal jalapenos, aka Exploity Boy sentry drones abundant in the level. In addition to a fire station, however, it also has a radio station with a fittingly for Duke silly name.
This is KTIT, K-Tit, playing the best tunes in town.
Despite being a relatively cramped level, there's enough variety to keep things interesting. One such example is a waterway leading into the level's ultimate exit, where they basically throw everything at you, including 2 Battle Lords. There's even a sort of entertainment area with books and drinks. Overall, I'd say it falls into the category of more good than not. I'll put it just under movie set. It's time to get flushed into E3M12 Urea 51. Technically it's Saturn version exclusive, but Sewers and Doom was Xbox exclusive, so it's only fitting. They even share a similar theme and they're both just terrible. Clearly though, this level was ahead of its time for FPS trends because it's so freaking linear that it would make modern Call of Duty blush. Literally not once is there a single diverging path, even in the few cases where it almost seems like there would be. The most noteworthy thing is the switch puzzle that Zelda Ocarina of Time Dodongo's Cavern has a similar puzzle that does the premise substantially better. I guess it's fitting symbolism that you end up being flushed down a giant toilet at the end because that's where this putrid, foul, nauseating waste of effort should belong if you ask me. Bottom of the barrel, and it's not even close. This makes Teardrops look like a classical masterpiece. It's time to embrace the flames of E3M8 Hotel Hell. For being a level that takes place in a hotel, Richard does a surprising amount with that premise. From a main lobby to a back alley to a bar and indoor swimming pool, it never feels repetitive for its environments. One nice touch is an aquarium tank that uses room above room to look like you're actually taking a dip into it via a secret door. As if all that still wasn't enough, there's a brief secret cave with an Indiana Jones reference, complete with collapsing ceiling once you grab the atomic health. A level on Duke Nukem 0 Hour would use a similar premise, but more on that some other time. For the sheer amount of variety and twists on display, it rises to one of the best, and it's going right above Darkside. Get ready to dodge some traffic in E3M11 Freeway. Despite the level name, it's a little on the cramped side, especially for the actual freeway part of the equation. It does have a couple of interesting references though, one being Car 54 that does an exploding spin. The Terminator under a crusher, though, might be the slightly more well-known reference. The collapsed building you go inside of is also a pretty nice touch, I must admit. One neat thing about Duke 3D levels is that they have continuity. In this case, there was a manhole at the secret exit, so it starts in a sewer. Ultimately, it's an alright level, certainly up there for secret levels. I just wish there was more of it, but I'll place it just above Rapid Transit. Grab your football helmets and get ready to charge into E3M9 Stadium. I'm gonna be honest with you, there isn't that much to this level. Mechanically, the Cyclord Emperor is pretty similar to the Overlord in that rockets are most of his attacks. While he does also have Octobrain Blast and he does fire his rockets at a slant like Mancubi from Doom, it's still hard not to draw comparisons. That's not to say the level is completely devoid of interest, however, like the Nukem button rising you to the top in the beginning. Then of course there's the Duff Beer blimp you can actually shoot to get a ton of stuff out of. Duke kicking out the Emperor's eye like a field goal in the cutscene is also admittedly pretty satisfying as a literal kickoff to the original Duke 3D. I prefer the Duke 64 version of this level though, that at least adds walls and a ceiling to look more visually interesting. I guess it's fine as a boss level, but it just falls flat for depth. I'm only placing it just above Spin Cycle. You'd best give up all hope right now because in E4M1 fashion, it's impossible! One thing that's abundantly clear is Randy Pitchford, yes, that Randy Pitchford, really likes explosions. There's a tape recorder that self-destructs, for example, and the vault is straight up a chain explosion. Probably the highlight of the level is a series of doors leading to a telephone lift, clearly inspired by Get Smart. Most of the rest of the level is very military-based, complete with a bunk. Notably, this level also induces protector drones, very inspired by Xenomorphs, but with the addition of a shrink ray attack. Probably my biggest gripe in the level is the vault switch combination because the switches are raised so you either have to jump or shoot each one until you find the right combo. If nothing else, it's an exciting adrenaline-filled level with some intense action. It's going above movie set. I hope you're hungry because it's time for E4M2 Duke Burger. Using the order menu to get a key card is a little bit obscure, but the Beavis and Butthead reference never fails to make me laugh, so I'll give it a pass. It's only kind of a shame that you either need a protector drone or a shrink ray shot to progress past a certain point, but it's not a big deal. Probably my biggest criticism is that it's kind of small. It's a shame it doesn't have a loading bay like the one in Duke 64, which would have helped a little bit. In typical satirical fashion, Duke Burger has a dirty little secret in its burgers. I'm actually surprised that Duke would be okay with dog meat being fed to his customers. You'd think it would hurt his heroic image a bit. Well, at least there's a reference to Scooby-Doo. Ultimately, it has a similar criticism as Freeway, where I wish there was more to it, but it's the more solid level, so I'll place it ahead of that. Grab your mop because there's cleanup in aisle 4 and E4M3 shopping bag. I'm sure you could find similarities to Duke Burger, but I think this is the superior level to that one overall. While Duke Burger felt a bit on the cramped side, Shopping Bag has more of a spacious feel with several rooms of shelves and displays in addition to an employee office and a loading bay. The meta joke about the employee Jack who was fired for playing Duke 3D on the job was pretty funny. Interestingly, the end of the level has crushers, but there's a secret you can use to potentially shut them down. The berth overall hasn't been as pistol start friendly as Shrapnel City, but at least it does give you the chance to get most of the weapons in this level. I'll give the level credit, it's a nice spacious level, and you can tell Richard Gray laid out the groundwork on it. I'll place it above It's Impossible. Get your mouse ears ready as we head into E4M4 Babeland. This may come as a shock, but Babeland is based on Disneyland, except better because you're not getting price gouged. I know, revelation of the century, that's what the mouse parody is there for. When you get into it, despite being basically all water-based rides, they're very solid. The most creative is probably the shooting gallery, even if it's just a switch combination that resets when you boil it down. Here's a tip, shoot the ones from left to right that don't have something behind them. It all climaxes with a boat ride that's obviously based on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, down to a pirate trying to lure a dog with the cell keys. And of course it ends with a full-blown animatronic pirate war with cannonballs flying everywhere. All around, I consider it one of the better Duke 3D levels with a good amount to it. I'll place it above LA Rumble. Let's get down in the mud in E4M5 Pigsty. One thing to note about this level is Richard Gray allegedly did almost all the level despite Randy Pitchford taking credit for it. Richard says the only real difference was a hung jury joke that was added, and I did notice a secret apartment room that his last build in the wiki doesn't have, but that's such a minor thing. The level itself is actually fairly well put together, basically a police station and courthouse, so there's plenty of police jokes and references. You've got a bloodied interrogation room with a one-way mirror and a secret execution post. The police station even has toxic waste in front of jail cells with caution tape that almost suggests it was intended to be there. It's Duke 3D, so being run down and corrupt is par for the course. Also, I didn't really notice this before, but there's a really funny security screen joke about ducking a commando's rocket. I'll put it above Shopping Bag. It's not as big, but it has tighter design, so you get more bang for your buck, so to speak. Let's go looking for alien waifu in E4M11 Area 51. The best way I can describe this level is it takes the premise of Launch Facility, but it does it so much better in my opinion. Instead of one space shuttle failing to launch, you successfully launch 2 missiles on a mothership. It basically uses raising sectors with explosions to represent the fire trail, and the shutters close, presumably to protect you from the blast, but the effect is still quite good. The rest of the level has a nice blend of secret base and some outdoor cliff areas. There's even a confiscated alien ship in the base you can go inside as a secret, which is a nice touch. Overall, I'll place it right below Babeland. The design isn't always the tightest, but it's easily the best of the secret levels thus far, and I can see why it got into Duke 64. It's time to deliver some packages in E4M6 going postal. One plus is this level has perhaps the most impressive use of rooms over rooms, using the flat sprites for bridges to have a conveyor belt you can go under, over, and through. It only really gets away with this by obscuring the openings with flaps so you can never see inside and outside at the same time. Sadly though, the final act kind of just relies on spamming enemies, 2 Battlelords and all. Having a kind of explosive flamethrower you control helps a bit, but it was still a bit of a grind to go through. The rest of the level just falls under fine. It has a few gags like Pick Up Bart and First Class and Overnight going to the same pile, but it doesn't stick out too much. It has some interesting elements, but ultimately nothing too special and has a weak finish, so I'm placing it below Shopping Bag. It's another light camera action in E4M7 Triple X Stacy. You'd expect it to be primarily a movie production like Movie Set, but it actually has some good variety here. You go through a comedy club, funnily enough, called the Funny Boner Club, and a canal before the level's over. The use of conveyors to make a printing press is pretty clever, and the shrink ray blast in the sewage probably caught some people off guard. One plus is none of those detestable battle lords. There are a few pig cop tanks, of course, but the big rear button takes care of them fast. Another thing to note is that this is another level Richard Gray claims to have made most of, and it definitely holds up to his other creations. Overall, I consider it well enough varied and enough to keep my attention. I'll place it above Shopping Bag. Get your radiation goggles on because it's time for E4M8 Critical Mass. Apparently this level was in development back in the lame Duke days, which makes perfect sense. Honestly, I'm surprised they didn't put a nuclear plant into a game called Duke Nukem much sooner, but better late than never. With the obvious exception of Area 51, this is the most linear of the Duke 3D maps, to the point that previous sections become inaccessible. I get that it's because everything's falling apart, but those multiplayer exclusive teleporters sure would be nice right now. At least the level does a good job amping up the urgency. The whole place starts shaking after you compromise the cooling system, causing the whole place to explode and come down. Overall, it's a fun little level with some good destruction, but the linearity and relatively short length really brings it down, so it's going below freeway. I hope you get your tetanus shot because we're going into E4M9 Derelict. This is the last non-boss level and it shows. Come get some. Pistol starting is a rush to get yourself properly armed. Thankfully, once you grab some weapons, it's business as usual going through the ship's various floors. The protector drones are certainly really coming in strong here. For the most part, it's just fine. I actually remembered a small mess hall more than anything else until I played it recently for the ranking. Perhaps my least favorite part of the level is this hazard liquid section that rapidly drains your boots and then health even when you're underwater in it, which goes against conventions. Mercifully, you can unlock a shortcut after you've gone through it so you can backtrack afterwards, but it was still just a little annoying. Ultimately, it doesn't always hit the mark, but it's a nice beefy level and it's going right above going postal. It's time to face royalty in E4M10, the Queen. This is probably obvious and not really saying much, but it has slightly more going for it than the stadium, so I'll give it props for that at least. Granted, the two main areas you go into are mostly mirror copies of each other, which brings it down a little, but at least there's more to do and it's visually interesting. If there's one thing I wasn't a fan of particularly though, it's waiting for turbines so you can press switches and get a keycard. As for the Queen herself, her lightning attack isn't the most fun to face either. Most of the difficulty in actually facing her is having so many protector drones around that your explosives risk hitting one next to you, giving it a bit of Tower of Babel from Doom vibe. I will give her this though, she definitely put up more of a fight than the Overlord or Emperor. Ultimately, the Queen isn't the most fun to face, and most of the level's content is one area mostly copied, but at least it has a decent amount going for it, so I place it just above Duke Burger. Get your balloons and special brownies ready as we start the world tour with E5M1 High Times. Now, this episode was made with 2016 computers in mind, so the result is much more detailed than previous episodes. Aesthetically, it does match the retro art, but you've got tons of little details like bicycles and shrubbery that the original probably couldn't have handled due to slow CPUs in 1996. This level also introduces the very menacing Firefly troopers that can fly, shrink themselves to be harder to hit, and most notably have a freaking flamethrower. You actually take lingering damage from it unless you jump into a body of water. One nice touch is Duke Ahem takes a hit, so to speak, and an alien version of the Cheshire Cat appears and disappears, implying that he's hallucinating. Ultimately, it's a level that's not only visually pleasing but very solid and fun to rein in the new episode. It's going right below Pigsty. It's time to face the Crimson Menace in E5M2 Red Ruckus. Similar to XXX Stacy, this level has a surprising amount of variety to it. It all starts out fairly unassuming in a street area and you think you've got the level figured out. Going into the back of a store, however, you soon find yourself going down, down, down into a base. There's even an underground cavern with some octobrain-infested water to take a dip in. The level also introduces Overlord sentries, a nice change of pace from just Battlelord sentries. Interestingly though, it also has a full-sized Overlord that doesn't end the level either. This of course takes place in a pretty massive silo with two very tall missiles that become revealed. It's only a shame you can't set them loose like in Area 51, but that would obviously be much harder to pull off without them being behind a viewing window or something. Once again, Richard Gray shows why he's called the Level Lord, and I'll place this one above Pigsty. It's time for some turmoil in E5M3 Bloody Hell. The actual level is thematically split into three parts, all pretty fleshed out. You've got a performance theater leading into a street and finally climaxing with the Palace of Westminster. In case you lot couldn't bloody tell, it's London themed, so you can expect winks to things like Big Ben or the TARDIS. The street might be what I enjoyed the least for gameplay, but I can't deny it's impressive to walk around in. It doesn't really look that beyond the scope of older Duke 3D levels either, although it probably wouldn't get 20 FPS on a DX266. There's even a bizarre teleporting puzzle where you're supposed to go in ascending numeric order until you reach the keycard. I must say, these world tour maps have been proving to be quite enjoyable. I'll place it just below Hotel Hell, making it technically my second favorite map with Hell in the name. It's time to embrace pyramid power in E5M4 Mirage Barrage! If I'm being honest, Act 1 of this level is probably the weakest area of the Episode 5 level so far. It's a bit like Abyss in that the maze feels more like filler, but at least it's pretty visually interesting. The elements inside the pyramid were actually very creative and enjoyable though. My personal favorite is probably the shrink puzzle. It's not really a new concept, but it has more of a vertical traversing, which makes it feel different. The fifth element reveal was also pretty amusing to me, as was the Serious Sam reference. Unlike Forever's extremely cringy humor, this is the kind of humor that's vintage Duke 3D and it fits right in. The spaceship at the end is somewhere in the middle. It's very visually pleasing and more engaging than the outside maze, but it just can't live up to the element trials, to be honest. Overall, the inside of the pyramid is very good, but there's a little too much filler, so I'll place it just above Derelict. It's time to embrace the Roman ways in E5MA Prima Arena. This is one of those maps that's made for putting a lot of mobs out on you. You could also call them slaughter maps, but I don't think this is that crazy. It's less go to it and more Fortress of Mystery, if you know what I mean. Mind you, if I'm going with that comparison, this wins by a landslide in the visual aesthetics department. Prima Arena is probably the smallest of the World Tour maps, but it still has a lot of variety. It starts out with a preparations area with bathrooms and janitor equipment and the like, and leads into a main Coliseum area with a platform with jets of fire. The underbelly is also very nice with Roman-styled pillars, many of which are knocked over and damaged, which really gives it a sense of 3D detail. As far as mob maps are concerned, this is probably the most visually interesting, especially from Duke 3D, and I'll place it just below Lunar Reactor. It's time to grab your bicycles for E5M5 Tour de Nukem. The start seems pretty similar to Red Ruckus, out in the street unassumedly and even goes underground. It's not really as good as that one though there's at least a platform section to help break things up. The alien ship with a large battle lord after you get through some cliff areas kind of remind me of the Abyss, so I would consider it a better version of that. It even has a sewer full of nukage, but the design is so much more interesting with a sort of convenience store area leading into broken subway tracks. It also helps that the street above has enough depth to be interesting, with a sort of ambush around the corner. There's even an almost hilariously out of place secret in the underground area with the intermission screen on the wall and a woman winking on the TV screen. Overall, it's another nicely varied level, so I'm placing it just below XXX Stacy. It's time to cool off in the river in E5M6 Golden Carnage. It actually starts out with a mini-boss battle lord, but you can enter a submarine and basically fire a torpedo on him, the design being a nice callback to Death Row. The level itself nicely starts out in a very broken Golden Gate Bridge and building up into the Fort Point National Park. The end of the level just straight up goes into a tentacle-covered area with assault troops and protozoid eggs everywhere, and 2 mini-boss battle lords. There's actually 5 of them in all, but I didn't mind them since you get plenty of firepower, and as I mentioned, you can erase one of them really easily. The San Francisco Bay adds plenty of opportunity for swimming, though World Tour's True 3D makes these underwater sections ridiculously dark. While it never quite hits the same high as the elements in Mirage Barrage, it's more consistently fun overall, so I'm placing it just above that. It's time to drop into the hottest level, E5M7 Hollywood Inferno. I'm gonna say it, the Cycloid Incinerator is a very lackluster boss. The recon patrol vehicles are probably the closest thing to a threat in that area, with him often limply trying to use a short-ranged flamethrower, not realizing how far away he is from you. Given your own incinerator has a long-ranged burst, giving him one would have really helped. That's not to say the level as a whole is terrible, although it's aggressively linear up to the level of critical mass in Area 51. Maybe Alan Bloom knew this was a pathetic boss because the level has 5 mini-bosses in it, 1 Battle Lord, 2 Overlords, and 2 Cycloid Emperors. The Hollywood sign and visual of the incinerator's meat being cooked over an open fire is funny. It's just a shame the level as a whole is relatively a shrug. It's only a shame the finale level to World Tour is also the weakest. It's going right below Alien Queen. It's time to give the king one last overview. If there's a location that Duke is at his best at, it's city environments. It's something that Doom 2 attempted with some levels but can never match, which really set Duke 3D apart. The perfect example is LA Meltdown, which starts out very strongly with Hollywood Holocaust and Red Light District, but just sort of falls off a cliff. Compare that to Shrapnel City, The Birth, and World Tour, which have consistently better levels in my opinion due to focusing more on city environments in different aspects. And of course, Flood Zone is the peak of greatness to me. It combines the fun flying like swimming in Duke 3D with stellar 3D space and of course that city environment. World Tour was kind of a letdown with its finale, which is kind of a shame since it had so many great ones before that. With 2 noteworthy exceptions though, I wouldn't say the vast majority are terrible or anything. Some may be more memorable than others, but it's still a damn good ride through and through.